Then the detachment of soldiers, with its commander and the Jewish officials, arrested Jesus. They bound him and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jewish leaders that it would be good if one man died for the people. Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus, but this disciple was known to the high priest. Because this disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard. But Peter had to wait outside at the door. The other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the servant girl on duty there, and brought Peter in. "You aren't one of this man's disciples too, are you?" she asked Peter. He replied, "I'm not." It was cold, and the servants and officials stood around a fire they had made to keep warm. Peter also was standing with them, warming himself. Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. "I have spoken openly to the world," Jesus replied. "I always taught in synagogues or at the temple where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I said." When Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby slapped him in the face. "Is this the way you answer the high priest?" he demanded. "If I said something wrong," Jesus replied, "testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me?" Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Meanwhile, Simon Peter was still standing there warming himself. So they asked him, "You aren't one of his disciples too, are you?" He denied it, saying, "I am not." One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him. "Didn't I see you with him in the garden?" Again, Peter denied it, and at that moment, a cock began to crow.
Or do you keep that passage open in front of you? I've realised as I've been off, I've forgotten to give Sam any of my notes, I think, this morning. So good luck, Sam, with the PowerPoint. Here we go, 20 slides. They'll come up probably in whenever Sam thinks, so he might be talking about that now. So keep your eye on the screen as well. It may or may not help you this morning. Well, you're thinking about, are you a friend of Jesus? Are you a friend of Jesus Christ? I've been thinking this week about that because of Peter and Jesus' friendship. And instead of kind of trying to come up with a list of qualities of what makes a good friend, like caring and funny, or whatever you put on your list, I don't know how you would define what makes for a good friend, someone you can trust. I decided to Google it and find some quotes about friendship that I thought were pertinent to this morning. I don't know, apart from Michelle Obama, I don't know who any of these people are, so apologies if they're really offensive choices. You can point that out to me afterwards and I'll scrub them. Anyway, Ed Cunningham, no idea who he is, said, "Friends are those rare people who ask how we are and then wait to hear the answer." I thought that was so true, isn't it? They care, they slow down, they listen. And I like this from Lois Wise. She said this: "A good friend is a connection to life, tied to the past, a road to the future, the key to sanity in a totally insane world." I think I've found that to be true for me. There are people on there who you know love you. They've got a track record that proves it. And they say those things that just help you steady the ship in those moments when otherwise it would go down. Here's the quote from Michelle Obama, which I also really liked. "Friendships between women, as any woman will tell you, are built of 1,000 small kindnesses swapped back and forth and over again." I think that's true of friendship, isn't it? Friendship by its nature is kind and it's reciprocal. Sometimes we're maybe the strong one and we've got more to give and more that we need to receive. And other times maybe we're in that position of strength where we've got more to give someone else. But it's kindness after kindness after kindness. How about this from Helen Keller? I thought this really showed the preciousness of friendship. I would rather walk with a friend in the dark than alone in the light. That's a big statement, isn't it? I would rather have life hard and difficult and be broken and have a friend by my side than be alone and life be straightforward and simple. Friendship is that precious. And the last one I found that spoke to me this week was by Walter Winchell, and he said this: a real friend is one who walks in when the rest of the world walks out. And I think based on those measures, Peter and Jesus actually had a really wonderful friendship over 3 years. Jesus had met Peter right at the start of his ministry, and he called him to follow him. And when he did, he gave him a new name. Some of you will know he was called Simon, and Jesus renamed him Peter. And in the tradition of the Dowland family, they always remind me it's a nickname, and it can be shortened to Rocky. Actually, Oscar and I were watching Creed 2 last night. So I've recently been confronted with aging Rocky. But Rocky's the big man. And I think Peter saw himself that way. He liked the nickname. There's a bond of love and friendship. I think sometimes we dehumanize Jesus. We think of him with a halo or a very good and godly guy, difficult to get around. But Jesus attracted people to him. And I think one of the reasons why was because he had a good sense of humor. He saw the guy. He didn't treat people just as a crowd, but as real, genuine friends. When I used to be a teacher, I used to have a nickname for each and every child in my tutor group. Why did I do that? Well, because I wanted that bond that you get. And Jesus and Peter had a bond. It was a bond of love, but a bond of respect, a bond which said, you're Rocky, the rock. And on this rock, I'll build my church. He said to Peter, follow me. And for 3 years, Peter devoted his life to him. And Peter was a good friend. He recognized just how great Jesus was. He was the sort of friend who stepped up when everyone else walked out. So some of you will know the feeding of the 5,000. It's quite a famous Bible story where Jesus takes a little boy's pat lunch of 5 little bread rolls and essentially 2 fish fingers and creates filet-o-fish and distributes it to more than 5,000 people. It's an incredible miracle. But he follows that up, and a lot of people don't know this, with some really tough teaching about why he'd come. And at the end of that teaching, here's what happened. From this time on, many of his disciples turned back. His disciples, his friends. And they no longer followed him. And Jesus opens the door to the few who remain, the 12. He says, you do not want to leave too, do you? And it's Simon Peter, you see, who steps up, and look what he says. Look what he recognizes about Jesus. Simon Peter answered him, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and to know that you are the Holy One of God. These are incredible words. Peter got that right. He saw clearly who Jesus was. The Holy One of God stood before him in human form. He understood that Jesus had the words of eternal life, an answer to death, a reconnection with the God who made us. This was the one who could do that. Peter saw that. He was Jesus' friend. And he also understood the cost of discipleship. Don't let anyone tell you that being a Christian is an easy thing. There are people, you see, who don't understand the cost of it. They sort of treat it like a hobby, like some of you do on a Sunday morning because, you're a good sort of person. No. The cost of discipleship to Jesus is total. Demands my soul, my life, my all. And based on that, you see, Peter was a real disciple, a real friend. He'd heard what Jesus said about the total cost of discipleship, and he'd responded with all of his heart. He honestly believed he could give his life for Jesus. So on the night he was betrayed, Simon Peter said, look, wherever you're going, where are you going, Lord? Wherever it is, whatever it costs you, I'm your man. And Jesus said to him, where I'm going, you cannot follow now, but you will follow later. And Peter then responded, Lord, why can't I follow you now? I'll lay down my life for you. And I am absolutely sure in that moment he meant it. We sort of know for sure, because when Jesus was being arrested in the passage Andrew so helpfully took us through last week, Peter's made sure he's got one of the two swords the disciples own. He's tooled up, ready for the fight. And when it all kicks off, it's Peter who draws the sword and starts slashing wildly around and lops off a servant's ear. Do you remember? It's my favorite Bible story it was Isaac's favorite Bible story when he was a child. I don't know what it says about him. Anyway, he always wanted that story read. Lopped off his ear. You see, he's up for it. There's a garrison there of Roman soldiers. There's Jewish officials, and Peter's like, he's imagining the worst case scenario is that he and Jesus go down together, side by side. They're like the dynamic duo, Batman and Robin, Starsky and Hutch, Ant and Dec. Inseparable. Inseparable. But today's story is really important. Really important. Because despite all of that, there was something massive that Peter didn't understand about himself or about Jesus. And when we come to this story here, you are reading the account of a man who was utterly broken by just how wrong he could get things, just by how badly he could let down his best friends, by how easily he could go from that place where he said, I'm Rocky and I'll take on the world, to a place where 3 ordinary people questioned him and he denied he knew Jesus at all. Two things I want to say up front. If you're here this morning, if you're here today and you feel utterly broken, if you're here today and your night is full of tears, then there is a God who knows. There's a God who sees. There's a God who's with us in those broken moments and loves like no other. And the second thing I want to say is this. No one comes into the kingdom of God with their head held high. Not one. No one comes in because they were good enough. No one comes in because they earned their place. The only way in is through tears, through brokenness, through a realization that we are not as good as we thought we were, but far more wicked than we ever imagined. And this story confronts us with that. And then the comfort that only Jesus Christ, the friend of sinners, can bring. So we're going to look at this. There's 4 scenes. We're going to work through them pretty quickly today. And there's things I'm not going to say that you might have questions about. If you want to, then you can ask me, and I'll give it my best shot to answer your question, or I'll read a book by someone smarter and find out. But there are 4 scenes here. Essentially, it goes from Jesus to Peter, and then to Jesus, and back to Peter. It's that straightforward. So scene 1, Jesus was destined to die. It says, then the detachment of soldiers with its commander and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus. Stop there. Camera pauses. There's the crowd. And you can make out very easily the Roman soldiers in their uniform and the Jewish religious leaders also in their uniform. Get this. In the ancient world, to the Jewish mind, there were 2 groups of people. There were Jewish people and there were Gentile people. There were Jews and there were Romans. And they all came together to arrest Jesus. The point John is making is the whole world had turned its back on him. The whole world was walking out on this one. They'd made up their minds. There was nothing good about this man. And Jesus is then taken to Annas' house. They bound him and brought him to Annas, first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. There's some confusion here, isn't there? Who's the high priest? Is it Annas or is it Caiaphas? Don't worry, I'm not going to point the finger at you and ask you to explain. Here's how it is. Annas was the high priest from 9 AD to 15 AD. This is historical. This isn't in the Bible. These are from sources outside of the Bible. If you don't think this is reliable, then I can point you to where you can find out these things. So from 9 AD to 15 AD, he was the high priest. But you know, like American presidents, once they're president, they're called Mr. President forever. So wherever you think of Donald Trump, whether you're a big fan or not, he is still Mr. President when people meet him. And he will be till he dies. And so will Joe Biden. Whatever you think of him, once a president, always a president. I was going to make some comment about Doctor Who, but it's always dangerous territory because Whovarians, whatever you call yourselves, always know more than I do on Doctor Who. So I was going to say something similar about doctors, but I'm not. Anyway, once a doctor, always a doctor. Once a president, always a president. So Annas was thought to be high priest, even though he hadn't been for more than 15 years. There's no confusion. Since then, 5 of his sons had been high priest. And now his son-in-law was high priest. It's not for nothing that I tend to refer to the Jewish leadership this time as the Jewish mafia. They were a powerful, crime-based family using religion as a front for evil. And when people got in their way, they got whacked. And the next guy in line to get whacked was Jesus. Caiaphas had already stood up and said so. That man is going to die for our sake, for our nation. They'd already decided before they listened to him what they were going to do, and we'll come back to that. But there was something they didn't realize. Jesus died willingly, not for one nation, but for all nations. He died for his friends. One of my favorite things Jesus ever said is this: greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. And there was a friend, you see, who was in need even though he didn't realize it, because scene 2, Peter had been warned he would deny Jesus. So Simon Peter and another disciple, some think John, some think not John. If you want to waste several hours of your life, I can give you things to read. I'm none the wiser following them through. Some people think it was John, some think it's not John. There are good arguments on both sides. But they were following Jesus, and the other disciple, John or not John, was known to the high priest, and he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard. Peter had to wait outside. The other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the servant girl there, and brought Peter in. Here's the moment. This little girl, the world is for a young girl who was a servant, not particularly scary, I don't think, says to Peter, as he's following someone who's known to be a disciple of Jesus, "You aren't one of this man's disciples, are you?" And Peter in that moment says, "I'm not." It's a huge, whopping, great lie. And it should have set off alarm bells in Peter's head, because Jesus had said this to Peter. Peter, do you remember, said, "Lord, why can't I go with you now? I will lay down my life for you." But then, I should have that on a slide, I think, Sam. I do, hooray. Then Jesus answered, "Will you really lay down your life for me? Very truly I tell you, before the cock crows, you will disown me 3 times. You see, what should have happened, I think, when that first denial took place, his alarm bell should have gone off in Peter's head. Oh yeah, Jesus said this was going to happen. Lord, I'm so sorry. I'll pull back. But no alarm bells went off in his head as far as we're told. He sinned. He did the wrong thing. He ignored the warnings of Jesus. Can I say we do the same thing often at our own peril? Jesus tells us what's right and wrong. He tells us what's sinful and what's righteous. And so often we think, well, I'm just going to make up my own rules. I can still follow Jesus and ignore that thing that he's said. Can I say you can't? In the end, that path leads only to death and misery. We need to heed the warnings of Jesus. We need to believe he knows best. But Peter didn't, and the story continues. Scene 3. Jesus is now arrested and he's treated with utter contempt. Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. I've spoken openly to the world, Jesus replied. Do you notice he's asked about his disciples and his teaching? Probably they want to know, how many have you got following you? What sort of uprising can we expect? How much does Jesus say about his disciples? Not one word. Judas may have betrayed him. Peter might be in the middle of denying him, but Jesus protects and loves his own. Then he says this, I've always taught in the synagogues or at the temple where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. That doesn't mean he didn't teach privately, just the main things he taught were all out in the open. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I said. That was the way of establishing truth, a bit like we might do in court today. Call witnesses. Jesus was entitled to witnesses. They shouldn't really have asked him. He was the one on trial. He's being interrogated. They should have called witnesses. But what happens next? When Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby slapped him in the face. It's an insult, probably the back of the hand. Is this the way you answer the high priest, he demanded? But Jesus knows he's done nothing wrong. Do you see, he was led silently like a lamb to the slaughter, but this wasn't right. So he pushes back. If I've said something wrong, Jesus replied, testify as to what is wrong. But if I've spoken the truth, why did you strike me? Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. So what happens here is that they've already made their mind up about Jesus. We know that from what Caiaphas said, but the reaction to Jesus asking for a fair trial, all I'm asking for are witnesses, people to testify to what I've said, and they whack him across the face. They don't want to know. I don't know all of you here this morning. I wonder if you made your mind up about Jesus without even looking at the evidence. I was listening to some sermons from here. Yes, I'm very slow at DIY. And also a podcast of a philosopher who was talking a lot about Christianity. And at one point, the interviewer said, have you ever read the Bible? And the guy said, no, not since I was a child. There he was, expressing his opinion based on nothing. When I was at university, I became friends with one of my tutors. He actually taught me and Amy. And we went out for lunch. And we were talking about faith. And I said to him, have you ever read the Bible? One of the most intelligent people I know, who's an expert on the church in the Middle Ages. And he said to me, no, I have never read the Bible. He was the head of the Center for European Medieval Studies, which is all about church thinking between about 1000 and 1500 pre-Reformation. Never read the Bible. I said, why? He said, well, I wasn't raised as a Christian, so I've never read it. Is that you here this morning? It's all second-hand opinion. It's all hearsay. You're happy for Gabriel and Lauren to be Christian. You're happy for people like me to do a job. But actually, you're not willing to look at that for yourself. You know, these Gospels are great. To read straight through John takes probably 2 hours. 2 hours of your life to make your own mind up. If you've never read it, come and see me. I'd love to give you a John's Gospel. My brother read it on the train from Temple Meads to Paddington and became a Christian when he was still at school. It's worth a look. Lastly in this story, Peter's defeated, so he wept. Actually, we'll come to that. It just says here, meanwhile, Simon Peter was still standing there warming himself, so they asked him, you aren't one of his disciples, are you? And he denied it, saying, I'm not. One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him. Didn't I see you with him in the garden? So he's recognized. And again, what does he say? He denied it. Now, one of the things we've realized is that John assumes you know Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But just in case you don't, two things I need to remind you of. One, before Peter denied it for the third time, he called down curses on himself if what he was saying wasn't true. When I was looking at a commentary this week as to what it might be, the commentators said minimum it would be something like this. I don't know in God's name what you're talking about. Just let that sink in. I don't know in God's name what you're talking about. So Peter did that. And the other detail that the other three Gospels include, but this one doesn't, is that Peter went out and he wept bitterly. He was utterly broken by this, destroyed by what he had done. He thought it was the end for him. You see, there never was a dynamic duo. We sang it already this morning. I didn't know until later in the week Jess was going to pick this. He took my sins and my sorrows. He made them his very own. He bore the burden to Calvary. And he suffered and he died alone. Why? Because greater love has no one than this, that he should lay down his life for his friend. And when it comes to Jesus, even the strongest of men, Rocky, the one who would lead the church, had to learn that he could only follow Jesus once he knew Jesus had died for him. And yet when you begin on that, I think sometimes we give the impression that's where it ends, that somehow all you've got to do is almost sign on the line. Yes, I believe that. Yes, I'll go through the waters of baptism. No. That's the beginning. And it's the beginning of something very precious. You see, when you realize that, you realize what a friend you have in Jesus. You have a friend who cares every day. If only you'll spend time with him, you'll realize every day he wants to know how you are. And he'll listen for as long as you want to talk. He loves you so much that he died for you. He's the only one who can make sense of your past. He's the only one who opens up a glorious future. And he's the only one who can keep you sane in this insane world because he understands. He knows. He knows how it began. He knows how it will end. And he will never lose one of his own. He loves you. He is endlessly kind. He walks with us through the darkest of days, as Lauren has testified this morning. And even as today, he's with us in those moments of joy. He is the friend for all seasons. And here's the thing. He will never walk out on you. No matter how badly you mess up, he will never walk out on you. No matter how hard life gets, he will never walk out on you. If your memory fails and you remember nothing, he will never forget you. He will never, ever, never forsake his own. What a friend we have in Jesus. To hell with religion. It condemns people to hell for all eternity. But all praise and honor and glory to Jesus, my friend, who cares for me like no one else. Friend to many in this room, who's forgiven our sins and made us his very own. Let's, like Peter, learn the lesson. There's a way into the kingdom as we're broken, as we feel that weight for how we've let him down. And there's forgiveness and grace because we worship a God whose mercy is more and will never fail us for all eternity. Let me pray. Lord, we love you. Many of us here, you've changed our lives beyond all recognition. Lord, when I think of how messed up I was before I knew you, I just want to thank you for rescuing me from the sin I was in, the despair I was in, and giving me a hope and a future when I didn't deserve anything but your wrath. And I thank you that that is the story of so many in this place. They've seen Jesus, the Holy One who has the words of eternal life. They've heard the call to follow. And Lord, like Peter, we are messed up people in a broken and messed up world. And Lord, we pray that we would learn that the way into the Christian life is the way through. It's on our knees. It's the place of tears. It's the place where we realize that no matter how badly we mess up and continue to mess up, we were always saved by grace, and your mercy is enough for us. And Father, I want to pray for any here today who don't yet know you. I want to pray for any here today who couldn't say that Jesus is their friend. Lord, Holy Spirit, make these things real right now. Open the eyes of the blind as you've done before. Unstop the ears of the deaf. Give those who have never praised the name of Jesus a tongue of praise and thankfulness right now, that they might know that Jesus is the friend who died for them. In Jesus' name, amen.